Well, I was impressed by people who have this BU and CV. I have not been CEO since I was 15 years old. I have not run 3 nuclear plants since I was 18. Last time I checked, I don't have got Nobel Peace Prize either, right? So you just have to do that. Peter Lundqvist, I work from Arista Networks. And also big thanks to LM and boys for having this golden slot, between you and lunch. So this is going to be interesting. I'm going to figure out this stuff. So is the CLI dead? Pretty catchy head one-liner there, but there's much involvement here. So let's start. These are the stuff that I'm going to get through. I will piece it one by one, and in the end, I will try to summarize and with the whole point with this presentation. First, the advantages and disadvantages with that CLI. Is CLI, in particular, in this case, network equipment, is that sort of crystal clear for everyone? Please raise a hand. Anyone that logs into a network equipment and type show route or show IP route, please raise a hand. What have you other guys doing? All right, okay. If config criteria is a CLI also, right? I started there, so don't you worry. So CLI, it's no doubtfully it has been a game changer, particularly for the network equipment. When I first had my hands on any form of network equipment, it was from a vendor that no longer works the earth. It was named Wellfleet. I have to see people that are past 50, close to 60, that probably remember that. You young brats, don't bother. And you people that just been working with Cisco all year, you have not seen any of that stuff either, right? So the CLI, or whatever you can call it, that was called technical interface. That means that you typed in this long sentence without any spaces, and it has to be exactly that, else bad things will happen. So this is sort of my first introduction to the CLI, right? And then more or less I worked in my whole life. CLI, type question. You see everything nicely that you can configure. In most cases you have an autocomplete. What's good with that? Obviously, you sort of learn fast. What's bad with that is that you guys don't give a shit about manuals any longer. Who actually read a manual before you log into a network equipment? Please raise a hand. You are liars. So that's one of the drawbacks with the CLI. I have also done that, right? I also log into Gear and try to find my way. Of course, I have used I'm a Linux user, so I don't know what, Notepad, text edit, and all other things to try when you're going to reproduce a config, right? Because you configure, of this 100%, you configure mostly 90% repeatable tasks, right? So that you save in a nice extra text somewhere, and then you just Control-C, Control-V, right? Yeah. Everyone has done that. No one has done that. All of you has done that, right? Because I work for a vendor, so I know that you do that, right? So this is all good. There's absolutely no problem with it. The problem is when you have 500 nodes to configure, or when you have 500 repeatable tasks that needs to be done 3 o'clock in the morning. Then this doesn't work, right? This is the essence of my compilation of CLI. There are other ways of doing it with using APIs. I'm going to go through it a little bit later, but first I'm going to heckle the CLIs. Strangely enough, just by occasion, someone was talking about RPKA. Exactly on this location, what was the last time you had this? 3 or 4 years ago, something like that? I was walking the hallway back and forward here, and for every 5 meters, someone said, you need to have RPKA, you need to have RPKA. So now we have RPKA, so all your problems is solved, I guess. Until you come up with next thing that will sell the earth and internet. The big problem here for us vendors is not really to create CLI that will do a function that will solve something. The big problem is to guess when you guys behave strangely, right? When you type in shut in the wrong section, or when you type in no, or when you type in delete. Then we supposed to save you with a nice banner that says in political terms, hey, come on, please. Are you really sure about this? And there's no really magic behind it. We're guessing when we're going to apply this, right? There's no machine, or there's no... I like to say that we spend a lot of dollars on psychology and try to figure out where people do most errors. We don't, really. It is a CLI meeting with a very angry and stressful PM, and his whole task is to get along with it, and then everyone has opinions. So the one that screams loudest is the winner. So that means usually that it particularly doesn't have to be the most pedagogic one. It's the one that has sort of been in the company for the longest time and is the cockiest one, right? So his view wins. But an example of pretty good way is, in fact, RPK, right? If you have spent time, configure a server that has downloaded all those ORI segments and validated your routes, I think last time I checked were roughly about 400K. Now you can have, if you have a radiator, rotinator, whatever it's called, you can see those ones that are validated for v4. So if you knew suddenly that service just shies, I want to delete it. A catastrophic result of that obviously would be that you wipe out the whole cache, right? Then everything that is validated will go to unvalidated, or even worse, right? So here you can do things. Is there a convergence need for RPK? Not really, right? So you put that information into a timer. So you can knock yourself out, kill all the servers, the cache will be there. If you really want to nuke the cache, you can do it with a clear command. But in this case, sort of this CLI saves you, right? It does, right? So even if you delete all your servers by mistake, you're not going to do any dramatical bad things for the internet. Then is the obvious ones, right? And this is the most complicated ones, the shutdown command. The shutdown means that you're going to kill mostly a process, but you don't want to remove it from the configuration. But this means that you can kill a daemon. So in this case, you're going to kill the BGP daemon with 1 million routes or more, right? Does that deserve a warning message? Who doesn't think that this deserves a warning message? Please raise a hand. Yeah, I mean, it deserves a warning message, right? But I mean, this is what this message very politely says. Sir, you're an idiot. Have you thought through this, really? Come on. This is what it says, right? But in a political, I mean, this is an American company. We have a lawyer for each developer. But these are the trickiest ones, because here is a multiple error. First of all, we have the assumption that people actually read outputs, right? Because the industry had created a sub-industry of certification programs, right? JNSI, CCIE, whatever is CCI, Coffee, EIE, whatever, that assumes that you know inside out how the CLI works and its implications if you do something wrong, right? What's the problem with that? We are humans. 3 o'clock in the morning, your certification probably don't mean a shit. And on the other hand, 9 o'clock, it maybe is not the best one either. It could be that your kids have been screaming all night. Your wife, husband, or even more excitement, your mistress, has complained about your honeymoon honey list, right? All those 150 things that you have promised now for 3 years to do, and you maybe just knock out 3 of those, right? Then go into the job and do these things on maybe 600 devices, probably not the best start, right? So we will not be able to cover that aspect. On the other hand, in this case, you're standing in a submenu here. You think you're going to shut down an RPK cache server. But we have accidentally forgot the shutdown command in that submenu. So the menu jumps up 1 bit, right? And there's the main BGP. So without reading this, you probably assume, okay, it wants me to shut down the cache in this submenu. But it doesn't, right? It says here, do you want to shut down BGP? And you type return and want more coffee because now it's past 4 o'clock in the morning or something like that. From there, bad things will happen. You probably will not be bonus this year for you and other stuff, right? So these are the difficult piece, right? We can never guard for mistakes. Interactive means that you're supposed to know what you're doing, and we're supposed to know what we are doing when we're creating stuff and also have a good feedback to it. This is actually really hard. This is difficult. It might be seen for you guys, it's easy, right? But if you are a BGP jockey, BGP is the only thing you're doing, well, then you're expert in BGP, right? But a router vendor, and I include even my strange colleagues that begin with C, and J, and I'm not going to name anyone else. I mean, we are humans, right? We have 15, 16 different type of protocols, right? We can't really come up with all the scenarios, right? We try to interact with you guys because honestly, we do features because someone wants to use them, right? Rarely we develop features and just try to pull it up to you or force you. Well, one company does that, but I'm not going to bring it up, that one. We all know who it is. One of those guys are in the room, by the way. So, let's get back to the first line here, try to do something differently. Let's talk about the API. So what is API? In short, it's a software that can use function in another software. And then we can talk endless about it, right? But in brief, you can do things that are maybe remotely. And here's the one very important things with this, right? It forces you to. How many, by the way, here are old enough to have done the military obligatory service? Please raise a hand. How many of you has talked into a radio something, right? Yeah, so they always say, think, push the button, talk, right? Exactly the same methodology should be used when you're configuring stuff, right? Where do you do that best? Where do you configure something on a machine that will be relatively safe and without error? Not online, right? You do it in a configuration database, in an offline tool, configuration management. That is where API is interesting, right? Because then you can reuse Ansible and preparative things like Cloud Vision to configure something offline. You can verify the configuration, and you not deploy it until it actually works. And hopefully you also have tested it. So you take all that drama with doing stupid mistakes. But API is not enough. You also need to have a carrier that embeds this, right? It is what's called REST or RESTful. I never really figured out what's the difference between REST and RESTful, but that's probably me. So there's a whole bunch of these things that have been developed, more or less. It's not really proprietary, but of course, depending on the customer base, we develop more on that particular part, right? There's a whole bunch of XML-based one with netconf. There's JSON RPC-driven APIs, which is essentially based on Python. There's OpenConfig with YAML and with or without netconf. I rarely see RFC 1149. If you see that somewhere, well, then please read all about it. Who knows about RFC 1149? Please raise your hand. Yeah, you fucker. So, how does it look like? It's very simplified, right? You embedded somewhat this CLI in a remote procedure, then you can do the task, configure or do a show command or something like that. This is how JSON RPC look like. OpenConfig. How many in here has done OpenConfig? Please raise a hand. Okay. How many here likes OpenConfig? Please raise a hand. Yeah, I figure. So OpenConfig was the next best thing, I guess, since RPK, since sliced bread. Because what intention were that those guys that sort of drives the internet these days, the titans, they had a mixture of white boxes and a mixture of vendors, right? So they have a need to configure it in exactly the same way for doing auto provisioning. And OpenConfig was sort of driven in that way. That also means that what was standardized in OpenConfig sort of drive their needs, right? So if you are Facebook or any other, what are your needs in your fabrics? Well, you need to configure an interface, right? You probably need to configure a VLAN. You need to set a little bit of IP addresses here and there. And you need BGP to advertise it. That's it. There's no EVPN, there's no L2VPN, there's no RSVP, there's no LDP, there's nothing of that. So what was the natural development there? Well, vendors, we are productive. So we create openconfig-vendor A, openconfig-vendor B, I'm not going to name C, open up a vendor D, and so forth, right? Are these things interoperable with each other? Where are you, Gustafsson? Do your openconfig interrupt with our openconfig? Well, you don't know anything about that anyhow. No, it's not, right? This is exactly the same thing with SNMP, right? You have SNMP, MIB2, everyone's supposed to work with that, but that's not enough. So in order to get all the glory things with vendors, you need to import private MIBs, right? So openconfig-something is very, very, very similar to SNMP private MIBs, sadly. It was a good intention, but sadly it has fallen off the track. I'm not to pipe you up here, right? But that's who I am. I always expect the worst. OpenConfig, if you do TCP dump or that, you wouldn't see it all. I mean, everything looks the same. Yep, it very looks the same. It's not particularly advanced. So if everyone was forced to use OpenConfig, we're forced to do it at the same time, for instance, when you do come up with something funky, EVPN, whatever VPN, and also the same thing you drive through ETF and standards where you configure it, actually everything will be pretty sweet, right? But it's not. Right, now I have complained about the CLI and I have complained about configure things locally because that creates usual issues, right? So now we're going to actually doing complex things. Route maps, how many here are configure route maps or similar? Yeah. So it is a sequential way of doing it, right? Line A do X, line B do Y, and so forth. And sometimes you're dairy, which means that on line 16, if it is XX, please go to line 663. So it's an eventually form of very long lines. This is what artificial intelligence was 20 years ago, right? World record in if then else lines, right? So doing complex things with this stuff more or less transfer what possible things can I do with this instead of try to solve anything. The thing here is that, however, for many people, this is seen as a good CLI, right? Because, I mean, you see sequence, right? People think sequence, right? Go up in the morning, go to the bathroom, take a shower, do your breakfast, jump into the car or something else, right? So this is why it has attraction. But however, it's pretty dumb, really, to solve complex things, right? And nothing in life gets easier these days, right? You might think that taking a photo here, say hello to your mama, but there's tons of things involved for doing that, right? So this is not really the best thing. No one really likes that on those vendors, right? And I think more or less every vendor has very similar to this. If RPK was the 8 breads a day or something, this is the next thing, by allowing a more programmatic approach. Because under this fancy CLI, there's a whole bunch of C++, Golang, whatever. So why not sort of try to marry that stuff, take those tools also to the CLI? And of course, you are forced to do this offline. But with this type of methodology, you can use arithmetic, you can use all kinds of variables that are simply very hard to do in a CLI, right? This is a programmatic language. That means that from maybe have a 16-page configuration, now you're maybe down to 1. Because you're using exactly the same thing as you would do when you program something. And that's nice. However, it's even more nice if you can marry them both. That is that you have this complex tool on one side that solves your needs, but also you can incorporate into the CLI. Well, this is my company's way of doing it. I firmly believe that other companies are following the same track, right? That means that for complex things, yeah, maybe we can't do everything in the CLI. Maybe we need to do that a little bit differently. The nice thing with this is that you actually do this part here offline. So you will see that this works, and then you compile it and everything, and then with those APIs that we're talking about, transport it to your device, right? But you can still see this function. You can test the config. You can test that your routes that you see with adjacent rib in and adjacent rib out and so forth actually do the job, right? So in my opinion, this is the way to go and onwards. And I'm firmly believing that most vendors in here actually have this exactly the same view on it. Because there's just a certain way we can push intelligence to CLI. Yeah, maybe we can get some artificial intelligence or whatever. But under the hood, I think this is the path to go. Because again, the good part here is that the complex stuff here, you actually do offline. The easy part you can do online. Then you have knocked out more or less 90% of all the issues. I don't hope it's some difficult questions you get down there, because that fellow there, he sounds really scary to me, really. All right, conclusion. I'm pretty solid here, I'm not going to be a hated object. So this is subjective, of course. CLI is not dead, right? But I think that most vendors, and particularly in the networking space, it's there, but we sort of pushed it to a certain limit, right? We have to go to the next stage. So sequence, policy, all that stuff, that's on the way out. Still, you will use CLI for complex things, right? You can argue that telemetry would get all the statistics right. But telemetry can take you there, like say, one customer complains about bad performance. Telemetry will see that you have drops on that interface. Maybe you need to pipe up the interface and so forth. That's not really troubleshooting, right? Troubleshooting if something doesn't work, right? Their CLI is golden. It will be there forever and ever. Adding line by line, not every management application also forgiven to it. If you're doing CLI scraping, and there's a banner for every second thing that you need to configure, that will never work, right? You will end up in a configuration that's probably even worse what you try to fix. And then powerful tools, programmatic ways, they're extremely hard to do in this CLI way, right? I've seen certain examples of some vendors trying it, but that will never be able to beat the true programmatic language, never. Why don't I walk around with this right now? 5 to 12, I discovered that. Building configuration offline. Well, if everyone would do that, then we wouldn't have any of those banners that say, please, are you going to do that, right? So that's one thing, right? But, there will be some there. My final piece here is that regards to auto-provision. I am fully realized not everyone can auto-provision. I work mostly with data centers, right? Which means that is a walk in the park to auto-provision. You can apply new configuration, a whole rack of servers with a breeze, right? It's not a problem. But if you're going to deploy a router in Uruguay and Montevideo, there is no out-of-band network. That is probably a little bit tougher, right? So we do realize you can't automate everything. But there are other tasks that really should be automated. And one of those things is when you're going to upgrade something. Because how many in here, before you do an upgrade, careless if it's a server or a router, how many of you take stats before you're actually going to do an upgrade? Uwe, are you sure about that? Okay. That means at least you have to start thinking right. That part, that is fully easy automated. Telemetry fix that in a breeze. Second one is to deploy that stuff that will take away traffic from your router, which could be applying ASP prepend, MED, or even funky stuff like gshout. Be aware when you're using that stuff, you need to know BGP, because a transitive attribute can actually, create some funny scenarios out on the internet. No name, but begins on F. Then you do the upgrade. And once the upgrade is done, then you do the reverse order. Apply the configuration that sort of make your routes less preferred to good again, and compare the statistic. All of this can be automated. This shouldn't be in a human involved here. Maybe you sit there with a cup of coffee and manage it. That's it. But there shouldn't be anyone 3 o'clock in the morning that does that. If you believe that doing that is the name of the game, then you're really in the wrong business. Right. 10 minutes early.
Do you want to take some questions?
Yeah, I guess I have no other options, right?
Okay, we have a question here at the front.
Shoot.
Hey, this is Kushal Das from Shunet. You mentioned Ansible once, but not much about what you feel about Ansible and where it helps to, like, CLI and like the new age kids who are only learning these things.
Ansible is a little bit the first. You can say that Ansible is sort of the auto-provision CLI, right? Because many of these provisioning tools either configure or do questions, right? With Ansible, you can supply configurations, but you can also supply config threads on it that you can check stuff. We have another tool in my company that's called Cloud Vision, but I'm a firm lover of Ansible. And the reason why I like Ansible is that if you work in a data center, Ansible is pretty common when you configure the service, right? Having that same tool for your floor switches, that's the name of the game. So you would not hear me saying a bad words of Ansible if that were your point. No way.
We have a question from Menti, or someone is looking for candid comments about the concept of intent-based orchestrators that are automating things via APIs.
Oh. Johan
Candid only.
is in the back here. He will answer that. No, I mean, I refer to take that question probably in the hallway. Please seek me up. I will not bite you.
Okay. So, a little bit early, but please join me in thanking Peter for the presentation. Thank you, Peter.